An Amish man was forced to marry an obese woman 40 years older, but she had shocking plans. The church bells tolled as the vows were spoken, yet this was no marriage of love. He was humiliated, trapped in a union everyone mocked. But on the very first night, the widow revealed a secret that rattled the town. She didn't want a husband. She wanted a protector. Behind her walls lay deeds to land the railroad would kill to own. And she was determined to give it all away, not to her family, not to the townsfolk, but to those who had once called this land their own. Now the quiet man of faith stands in the middle of a storm, facing deputies with torches, railroad men with greed, and a town that demands obedience. As her health fades and enemies close in, will this unlikely marriage become the town's greatest scandal, or its only chance at redemption? Your comments remind me that we're not alone in feeling deeply. If loyalty, second chances, and human dignity mean something to you, then you're right where you belong. The harsh winter wind whistled through Clear Creek's empty streets as Dale Stoltzfus stood before the weathered church steps. His plain black coat and broad-brimmed hat marked him as different from the townsfolk who gathered to whisper and stare. The morning sun cast long shadows across the frost-covered ground, but did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in his bones. "Ain't right," someone muttered behind him. "Man his age marryin' the widow Kittredge." Dale kept his eyes fixed on the church's wooden door, his shoulders straight despite the weight of judgment pressing down on him. At 32, he was indeed young to marry a woman of 72. But his uncle's words from their meeting yesterday still rang in his ears. "You owe more than you can repay, nephew. This is your chance to make good." The clip-clop of hooves drew everyone's attention. Ava Kittredge's polished carriage rolled to a stop, its black lacquer gleaming. The driver, a weathered man named Thomas, helped her descend. She moved with deliberate dignity despite her size, one hand gripping an ornate cane. Her dark dress was fine, but practical, her gray hair swept up beneath a modest bonnet. A group of railroad workers lounged against the hitching post, their rough laughter carrying across the morning air. "Well, if it ain't the Queen of Clear Creek come to claim her new toy." Ava's head snapped toward them, her eyes sharp as steel. "Mind your manners, Mr. Jenkins, or you'll find your credit at the general store suddenly dried up." Her voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. The men fell silent, shuffling their feet. Dale felt heat creep up his neck as he offered his arm to his bride-to-be. Her hand was cool against his sleeve as they climbed the church steps together. The weight she placed on him was substantial, but he bore it without comment. Inside, the church was nearly empty. Only his uncle, the preacher, and a handful of witnesses occupied the hard wooden pews. Their footsteps echoed on the plank floor as they made their way to the altar. Warm lamplight caught the dust motes dancing in the air, and somewhere a door creaked in the wind. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat, his voice bouncing off the bare walls. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Dale stood stiffly, his responses mechanical as he repeated the familiar words. He could feel Ava's presence beside him, solid and imposing. When the time came to exchange rings, her hands were steady while his trembled slightly. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend declared to the near-empty church. The words hung in the air like the dust motes, settling heavily on Dale's shoulders. The ride to Ava's house, his house now, he supposed, was silent save for the horses' hooves and the carriage wheels crunching through frozen mud. The property sat on the outskirts of town, a grand two-story structure with a wraparound porch and tall windows. Dale had seen it from a distance during his week in Clear Creek, but now it loomed before him like a mountain he would have to climb. Thomas helped Ava down while Dale collected his single carpet bag from the back. It held everything he owned in the world, some clothes, his Bible, and a few tools. The meager possessions of a man cast out from his community for questioning the Ordnung's strictures on helping outsiders during last year's drought. Inside, The house was warm and well furnished, with polished wood floors and heavy curtains. A Negro woman named Sarah, who Dale learned was the housekeeper, had prepared a wedding supper. The dining room table stretched long and gleaming between them as they sat at opposite ends. Dale stared at his plate of roasted chicken and potatoes, the food far richer than his usual plain fare. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly in the silence. He could feel Ava watching him as he bowed his head to pray. "Danke Gott für deine Gaben," he began in Pennsylvania Dutch, then caught himself and switched to English. "Thank you, Lord, for these gifts we are about to receive." "You need not change your prayers for my sake," Ava said when he finished, her voice matter of fact. "This is your home now, too." Dale looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time since the ceremony. They were a clear gray, direct and intelligent. "I am grateful for your generosity, Mrs. Kittredge." "Ava," she corrected, picking up her fork. "We are married now, after all." There was a hint of dry humor in her tone. They ate in silence, broken only by the clink of silverware. Dale's mind wandered to the small Amish community he'd left behind in Pennsylvania. The shared meals there had been simple but full of conversation and laughter. Now he sat across from a stranger who was his wife, in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. "Your room is prepared upstairs," Ava said as Sarah cleared the dishes. "The blue bedroom at the end of the hall. I trust you'll find everything you need." Dale nodded, understanding the unspoken arrangement. This was a marriage of convenience, nothing more. "Thank you, Ava." Later, in the privacy of his new room, Dale knelt beside the bed as he did every evening. The moon cast pale light through the window, making patterns on the blue wallpaper. He prayed longer than usual, searching for guidance. "Lord," he whispered in Pennsylvania Dutch, the language of his heart, "I do not understand your path for me. But I trust in your wisdom, even here in this strange place." The clock downstairs struck 9, its chimes echoing through the quiet house. Somewhere in her own room, Ava was likely preparing for bed as well. Dale wondered if she too was speaking to God about their unusual situation. He rose and went to the window, looking out over the sleeping town. Clear Creek spread below, its buildings dark except for the saloon and the railroad office. In the distance, he could make out the bulk of Ava's lumber mill where his uncle worked as foreman. Tomorrow he would begin whatever duties she had in mind for him. The wind continued to moan around the eaves, carrying the promise of snow. Dale thought of his father's words when he'd left the community. "The world will change thee, son. Better to stay and submit to God's way." But he had chosen a different path, one that had led him here to this grand house and this peculiar marriage. As he crawled between the soft sheets, so different from his old straw tick, Dale could only pray that somewhere in all of this, God's purpose would become clear. Dawn crept over Clear Creek with pewter-colored clouds hanging low in the sky. Dale woke before sunrise, as he had every day of his life. The strange bed and unfamiliar room didn't change habits formed since childhood. He dressed quickly in his plain, dark clothes, fighting the chill that had settled into the grand house overnight. The barn waited across the frosty yard, its weathered boards barely visible in the gray light. Inside, the familiar scents of hay and horse leather welcomed him. 2 bay horses nickered softly from their stalls, and a few chickens scratched in the straw. The work here, at least, was familiar, something his hands knew without thinking. Dale moved through the morning chores with quiet efficiency. He fed and watered the horses, scattered corn for the chickens, and gathered 3 brown eggs still warm from the nests. The physical labor helped settle his mind, giving him purpose in this uncertain new life. Behind the barn, he found the woodpile and splitting block. The axe was well maintained, its handle smooth from use. Dale swung it in steady rhythms, the sharp crack of splitting wood echoing across the yard. The exercise warmed his muscles despite the chill morning air. Sarah appeared at the kitchen door just as he finished stacking the fresh-cut wood. "Breakfast is ready, mister." "Stoltzfus, Mrs. Kittredge is waiting." The kitchen was warm and bright, filled with the aroma of coffee and frying bacon. Ava sat at the head of the table, already dressed for the day in a dark wool dress. She watched Dale set the eggs beside her plate. "I see you've found useful occupation already," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "Good. Idleness breeds discontent." Dale took his seat, folding his hands for grace. When he looked up, Ava was studying him with those sharp gray eyes. "We should be clear about certain matters," she said, stirring her coffee. "I know there are expectations about marriage, but I have no interest in such things at my age. I need your back and your Bible, not your hand in my bed." Dale nearly choked on his coffee. Such bluntness from a woman startled him, though he felt immediate relief flood through him. "I understand," he managed. "Do you?" Ava's mouth quirked slightly. "Good. Then we can proceed sensibly. I have business in town today. Supplies to order, accounts to settle. You'll accompany me." After breakfast, Thomas brought the wagon around front. Dale helped Ava climb up onto the high seat, then took his place beside her. The wagon wheels creaked as they rolled down the rutted road toward town. Clear Creek was stirring to life, shop owners sweeping their boardwalks and women hurrying to the general store. Heads turned as Ava's wagon passed. Dale could hear the whispers start up behind their backs. "Poor fellow, bought and paid for. Shameful business, that marriage. Heard she's gone addled in her old age." Ava sat straighter, her chin lifted high. If she heard the whispers, she gave no sign. She directed Thomas to stop in front of Henderson's general store. Inside, Dale followed as Ava moved through her shopping with brisk efficiency. She ordered flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples in quantities that made Dale's eyebrows rise. When Mr. Henderson tallied the bill, she counted out the money without hesitation. Dale carried the heavy sacks out to the wagon, aware of the stairs following him. He worked quickly but carefully, arranging everything securely. His movements were deliberate, measured, the same quiet dignity he'd learned in his Amish community. They made several more stops: the hardware store, the bank, the post office. Each time, Dale assisted without complaint, while Ava conducted her business with calm authority. By the time they headed home, the wagon was well loaded. That evening, after supper was cleared away, Ava surprised him again. "Come to my study," she said. "There are matters we must discuss." The study was a warm room lined with bookshelves. A large desk dominated the space, its surface covered with papers. Ava settled into the chair behind it, gesturing for Dale to sit opposite her. "What I'm about to tell you requires absolute discretion," she began, pulling out a stack of documents. "These are the deeds to my properties, the mill, the timberlands, this house, and several other parcels. Together they represent one of the largest private holdings in the territory." She spread the papers across the desk. Dale could see the official seals and elaborate legal writing, though the words themselves meant little to him. "My relatives expect to inherit it all," Ava continued, her voice hard. "So does the railroad. Silas Breck, their land agent, has been trying to pressure me into selling for years. But I have other plans." Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out another document. "This is my will. I intend to leave everything, all of it, to the Arapaho people who once lived here. Their hunting grounds stretched across this whole valley before the settlers came. I mean to give it back." Dale sat very still, stunned by the magnitude of what she was saying. Such a bequest would cause an uproar. The railroad would fight it. The townsfolk would be scandalized. His mind went to the biblical story of Naboth's vineyard, how greed and power had destroyed a righteous man's inheritance. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked finally. Ava leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Because I need someone I can trust. Someone with courage enough to stand against the pressure that's coming. someone who understands what it means to choose conscience over convenience. She tapped the papers with one finger. The question is, are you that someone? Will you protect my choice when I'm gone? Dale looked at the documents spread before him, then at this formidable woman who had married him for reasons he was only now beginning to understand. The weight of her request settled on his shoulders like a mantle. He thought of his own exile from his community, how he'd chosen to help outsiders during the drought, despite the Ordnung's rules against it, how he'd believed then, as now, that God's law of love must sometimes transcend human laws. I will need time to pray on this, he said honestly. Ava nodded, seeming to respect his caution. Prayer is well and good, but eventually we must act on our convictions. Think carefully, Dale Stoltzfus. This choice will not be an easy one. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner as Dale studied the papers, understanding that his answer would set the course for whatever lay ahead. The morning sun cast long shadows across the corral as Dale knelt in prayer. Frost still sparkled on the fence rails, and his breath made little clouds in the cold air. The familiar words of the Lord's Prayer brought him comfort, but his mind kept returning to Ava's shocking revelation. He rested his weathered hands on the rough wood of the corral fence. His father's voice seemed to whisper in his ear, remembered lessons from childhood. God's justice flows like a mighty stream. We must stand for peace, even when it costs us dearly. But other voices competed in his memory. His uncle's harsh warnings echoed, "Those savages would burn every farm and mill to the ground if they could. Only a fool would take their side." Dale winced at the memory, troubled by the hatred in those words. The creak of floorboards made him turn. Iva stood on the porch, one hand gripping her cane, while the other clutched the railing. Her breath came in ragged gasps from the effort of climbing the steps. Without hesitation, Dale rose to help her to the wooden bench. "Thank you," she said, settling herself with dignity. "The morning air helps ease my chest, though getting here grows harder each day." She gazed out at the frost-covered pasture, her eyes distant with memory. "I remember when this valley was different," she began softly. 20 years ago, Arapaho families would camp near the creek in summer. They traded with us. Beautiful beadwork for flour and coffee." Her fingers traced patterns in the air, as if touching ghost strings of colored beads. "Their children played with my son before he died of fever. They brought herbs when my husband took sick." Dale listened intently, hearing the weight of history in her words. "What changed?" "Progress," Ava said bitterly. "The railroad, the Indian Wars, broken treaties. Now they're confined to camps by the river, watched by soldiers who care nothing for their suffering." She gripped her cane tighter. "But I remember their kindness. I remember their dignity, and I mean to honor that." The sound of approaching horses interrupted them. 3 men rode up to the house, their mounts stirring up dust despite the morning damp. Dale recognized the one in front by his fine suit and silver watch chain, Silas Breck, the railroad agent. "Mrs. Kittredge," Breck called out, his tone falsely pleasant. "I hope we find you well this fine morning." He dismounted smoothly, while his companions remained on their horses, hands resting too casually near their gun belts. Ava remained seated, her spine straight as a rail. "State your business, mister." "Breck, I've no time for empty pleasantries." Breck climbed the porch steps, pulling papers from his coat. "I bring a generous offer from the railroad company. We're prepared to pay $8,000 for your mill and the surrounding timber rights." He held out the documents with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. $8,000? Ava's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "The mill alone is worth twice that. The timber rights are worth 5 times more. Do you take me for a fool?" "Now, Mrs. Kittredge," Breck's voice hardened slightly. "Be reasonable. The railroad is coming through, whether you like it or not. Better to profit from progress than stand in its way." Dale watched the exchange silently, marveling at Ava's composure. She didn't even glance at the papers. My answer is no, Mr. Breck. As it has been every time before, the mill is not for sale at any price. Breck's pleasant mask slipped, showing something ugly beneath. You're making a mistake, madam. A very serious mistake. He glanced at Dale with contempt. Your new husband cannot protect you from what's coming. You'll regret this stubborn pride. Dale stepped forward, placing himself between Breck and Ava. Though violence went against his beliefs, he would not let threats go unanswered. I believe the lady has given her answer, sir. The railroad men tensed in their saddles, but Breck waved them down. His smile was cold now. Indeed she has. Good day to you both. He turned on his heel and mounted up, leading his men away in a cloud of dust. Dale helped Ava rise, noting how her hands trembled slightly despite her fierce expression. They went inside together, where Sarah had coffee waiting. Are you well? Dale asked quietly, once they were seated in the kitchen. Well enough. Ava's color was returning. But you see now what we face. The railroad has no conscience, only appetite. They'll try to take everything, by law or by force. Dale nodded slowly. I begin to understand why you need allies. The day passed in normal tasks, but Dale felt a new awareness of danger around them. He checked the barn locks twice that night and made sure his bedroom window overlooked the road. At supper, Sarah served a hearty stew with fresh bread. The lamplight made soft shadows on the walls as Ava spread butter on her bread and began to speak. The Arapaho are camped by the river now, she said, under army watch with barely enough supplies to survive, children going hungry in this bitter weather. She looked at Dale steadily. I've been sending what I can, but it's not enough. They need more help. Dale broke his bread thoughtfully. What do you mean to do? I have supplies gathered, blankets, flour, dried meat. But I need someone to help me deliver them. Someone strong enough to load the wagon, brave enough to face questions. Her eyes held his. Will you ride with me tomorrow? Dale was quiet for a long moment, remembering his father's words about justice, remembering too his uncle's warnings. But he also remembered Ava's courage facing Breck, her determination to do right despite the cost. Yes, he said finally. I will ride with you. Ava's shoulders relaxed slightly, though her expression remained grave. Thank you. We'll leave at first light before the town wakes. There's risk in this, you understand? Dale nodded. I understand. And he did. Helping Indians could bring trouble from townsfolk and soldiers alike, but he felt a curious peace about the decision, as if stepping onto a path he was meant to walk. They finished their supper quietly, the lamplight warm around them, while outside the wind whispered of changes coming with the dawn. The winter sunrise painted the sky in pale rose and gold as Dale hitched the horses to the wagon. His breath clouded in the bitter air while he checked the harnesses one final time. The supplies they'd gathered, sacks of flour, bundles of blankets, and dried meat, lay hidden beneath old hay in the wagon bed. Ava emerged from the house wrapped in layers of quilts, leaning heavily on her cane. Dale helped her climb onto the wagon seat, tucking the blankets around her legs. She nodded her thanks, her face determined despite the early hour. Best take the back road, she whispered. Fewer eyes that way. Dale clicked to the horses, and they set off. The wagon wheels crunched through frost-covered grass as they skirted the edge of town. The morning was so quiet he could hear the creek gurgling beneath its skim of ice. The slow journey gave Dale time to think. A week ago, he'd been adrift, cut off from his community, unsure of God's purpose for him. Now here he sat, helping a widow bring aid to suffering people. Perhaps the Lord worked in more mysterious ways than his Amish elders had taught. Ava's sudden cough broke into his thoughts. She muffled it in her shawl, but her shoulders shook with the effort. Dale glanced at her with concern. I'm fine, she said firmly, before he could speak. Just the morning air. Keep driving." The sun had climbed higher by the time they approached the army post near the river. A young lieutenant stood at attention beside the crude gate, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. He held up his hand as they approached. "Halt! This area is restricted. No civilians allowed in the Indian camp without authorization." Ava straightened on the wagon seat, her dignity a match for any military bearing. "I am Mrs. Ava Kittredge. I've been trading with these families for 20 years, long before you were assigned here, Lieutenant. Lieutenant Morris, ma'am. But regulations are regulations. I cannot what? Cannot allow an old woman to bring supplies to hungry children?" Ava's voice carried clear across the frozen ground. "Shall I write to your commanding officer about how you turned away citizens bringing aid that your own army has failed to provide?" The lieutenant shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I knew your predecessor, Captain Williams. He understood the value of maintaining good relations with the local civilians. Do you wish me to mention to him how things have changed under new leadership?" Lieutenant Morris glanced between Ava's stern face and Dale's quiet presence. Finally, he stepped aside. "You may pass, Mrs. Kittredge, but only for 1 hour." "Much obliged," Ava said crisply. Dale guided the horses through the gate, marveling at how she'd wielded authority like a well-honed blade. The sight beyond the gate struck Dale to his core. Thin smoke rose from scattered campfires where women stirred pots of what looked like little more than hot water. Children in ragged clothes played in the snow, their feet wrapped in strips of cloth. The army tents offered little protection from the bitter wind that swept down from the mountains. Dale pulled the wagon to a stop near the center of the camp. Already people were gathering, drawn by the unusual sight of visitors. He helped Ava down carefully, then began uncovering their supplies. An elderly man approached them, his bearing dignified despite his worn army coat. Ava greeted him warmly. "Elder Natho, it brings me joy to see you." "Welcome, friend Ava," he replied in careful English. "You honor us with your visit." As Dale began unloading the wagon, Ava moved through the crowd, greeting people by name. She spoke to mothers about their children, asked after elders she remembered. Though her breath wheezed in the cold air, her eyes were bright with purpose. Dale worked steadily, distributing flour and blankets as directed. A woman about his own age approached with 2 small children clinging to her skirts. When he handed her a blanket, she pressed his hand between both of hers. "Thank you," she whispered in halting English. "The night's very cold. Children cry. Now they will be warm." Her eyes held such gratitude that Dale had to look away, humbled. For an hour, they worked to distribute the supplies fairly. Dale saw how carefully everything was received. Nothing wasted, nothing taken for granted. He thought of his own community's abundance, the full barns and warm houses, and felt shame burn in his chest. Finally, Lieutenant Morris appeared again. "Time's up, Mrs. Kittredge." Ava nodded, but took a moment to finish speaking with a group of women. As Dale helped her back onto the wagon seat, Elder Natho approached. "Your kindness will be remembered," he said quietly. "May the Creator watch over your path." The return journey was slower, the wagon lighter but the day growing colder. They had traveled perhaps a mile when Ava began coughing, deep, racking coughs that shook her whole frame. Dale reached to steady her. "Should we stop?" he asked with concern. "No," she managed between coughs. "Just get us home." She pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, and Dale pretended not to see the flecks of red when she lowered it. The sun was setting by the time they reached the house. Sarah hurried out to help Ava inside while Dale tended to the horses. His hands moved automatically through familiar tasks, while his mind turned over everything he'd witnessed. Later that evening, after Ava had retired to her room, Dale knelt beside his bed. For the first time since leaving his community, he felt moved to pray aloud. "Lord," he began softly, I thank you for showing me your purpose today. For using even one such as me, cast out and uncertain, to help those in need." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "Thank you for giving me work that feels righteous, for showing me that your justice flows in many streams, not just one. Guide my path forward, that I might serve you faithfully in this new calling." He didn't hear the door open, but when he finished his prayer and looked up, he saw Ava standing in the doorway. Her eyes shone with unshed tears, though she said nothing. She simply nodded once, then disappeared back into the shadowy hallway. Dale sat for a long time in the quiet darkness, feeling more at peace than he had since leaving home. Outside his window, the stars wheeled overhead, silent witnesses to the changing seasons of a man's heart. The Clear Creek market bustled with morning activity, but whispers followed Dale as he moved between the stalls. He kept his head down, selecting fresh vegetables with careful hands, while trying to ignore the pointed stares and muttered comments. "Married that old widow for her money, plain as day," one woman hissed to another behind a display of apples. "Shameful business," came the reply. "A young man like that with Widow Kittredge? Ain't natural." Dale's ears burned, but he continued his shopping, remembering Ava's teaching about dignity. He picked through onions, potatoes, and carrots, filling his basket while pretending not to hear the gossip swirling around him. Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, drew back when his hand reached for a loaf of bread, as if his presence might somehow taint her goods. "We don't serve your kind here," she said loudly. Dale stood very still, aware of all eyes upon him. "My kind, ma'am?" "Those who consort with savages," she sniffed. "Words got round about your visits to that camp, bringing them supplies, encouraging them to stay where they don't belong." "They are hungry people, nothing more," Dale said quietly. "The good book teaches us to help those in need." "The good book also warns against unequal yoking," called out another voice. Dale turned to see Reverend Matthews standing nearby, his face stern. "Perhaps you need reminding of that during tomorrow's sermon." Dale set down his basket and walked away, leaving the vegetables behind. His steps were measured and calm, though his heart pounded. He could feel the townspeople's eyes boring into his back as he made his way down the dusty street. The next morning, Dale and Ava sat in their usual pew at church. The wooden bench creaked as Ava settled her bulk, her cane tapping sharply against the floor. Heads turned, and the usual pre-service chatter died away to uncomfortable silence. Reverend Matthews' sermon meandered through several passages before landing heavily on 2 Corinthians. "Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers," he intoned, his eyes fixing deliberately on Dale's pew. "For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness?" Dale kept his gaze forward, hands clasped in his lap. Beside him, Ava sat straight-backed, her chin lifted. When the Reverend's words grew particularly pointed, she struck her cane against the floor with a crack that made several people jump. After the service, as they made their way to their wagon, Ava spoke quietly. "Hold your head high, Dale Stoltzfus. Their wagging tongues matter less than a prairie wind." They were nearly home when they encountered Sarah Miller, a young widow Dale recognized from town. She stood by the road, two small children clinging to her skirts, her face pale with fever. "Mrs. Kittredge," she called weakly, "I hate to trouble you, but I'm taken ill, and the children." Ava didn't hesitate. "Bring them inside, child." "Dale, help her, please." Dale lifted the smaller child, a boy no more than 4, while Ava guided Sarah to sit in the wagon. The girl, perhaps 6, followed close behind, her eyes wide and frightened. Inside the big house, Sarah tried to protest. "I don't mean to impose." "Hush now," Ava commanded, but her voice was gentle. "Dale, fetch blankets for Sarah in the parlor. Children, come help me in the kitchen. We'll make cornbread." Dale helped Sarah settle on the parlor sofa, then paused in the kitchen doorway, surprised by the scene before him. Ava had pulled a chair to the counter so the little girl could reach, showing her how to measure flour into a bowl. The boy sat on a stool, solemnly stirring with a wooden spoon too big for his hands. "My mama used to let me scrape the bowl," Ava was saying, her usual sharp tone softened to a warm honey flow. "Would you like to do that?" The children's faces lit up, and soon the kitchen rang with laughter, a sound Dale realized he'd never heard in the house before. Ava's own chuckles joined in, deep and rich, as flour dusted the counter and small hands patted the dough. That evening, after Sarah had been tended by the doctor and the children were asleep upstairs, Dale sat with Ava in her study. The lamp cast warm shadows on the walls as he finally spoke of what had been weighing on his heart. "The things they say in town," he began, his voice rough, "about our marriage, about helping at the camp. I know I shouldn't let it trouble me, but—" "You feel shame," Ava finished for him. She set aside her ledger book, fixing him with her direct gaze. "Let me tell you about true shame, Dale Stoltzfus. True shame is seeing hunger and turning away. True shame is hearing children cry and closing your doors. True shame is watching injustice and choosing silence." Dale nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You have farming knowledge," Ava continued. "Knowledge that could help our friends by the river feed themselves. The Arapaho are proud people. They don't want charity forever. They want to provide for their families, same as any folk." "You mean teach them to farm?" Dale sat straighter, interest kindling. "Like I learned in Pennsylvania?" "Exactly so." Ava's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "The army won't let them hunt as they used to, but they can't stop them from planting. We have that patch of good ground by the river. Enough for a teaching garden, I reckon." Dale's mind was already working, remembering his father's lessons about soil and seasons. "We'd need to start soon, to be ready for spring planting. And tools, plows, hoes, seed." "I can provide those," Ava said firmly. "You provide the knowledge." They bent their heads together over Ava's desk, beginning to plan. Dale sketched rough diagrams of planting beds, while Ava made lists of supplies. Outside, a coyote called lonely across the prairie, but inside the study 2 unlikely partners worked in companionable purpose. Their shadows merged on the wall behind them. As Dale drew careful rows in his notebook, he realized the hollow feeling that had haunted him since leaving his community was easing. Here, in this strange partnership with an old woman as stubborn as she was kind, he had found something he hadn't known he was seeking. Not just purpose, but understanding. Ava might not share his faith or his background, but she shared something deeper. A belief that doing right mattered more than doing what was easy. The lamp burned low as they continued planning, their quiet voices mixing with the tick of the clock and the crackle of the fire. In the rooms above, the children slept peacefully, their dreams perhaps touched by the lingering sweetness of cornbread and the memory of an old woman's surprising, gentle laugh. A week passed like water flowing in Clear Creek, steady and purposeful. Dawn found Dale in the barn, loading the wagon with precious cargo, burlap sacks of seed corn and wheat, wooden boxes of simple farming tools, and 2 worn but serviceable plows. His hands moved with reverence over each item, remembering his father's voice teaching him the ways of the land back in Pennsylvania. The morning air bit sharp and clean as Dale helped Ava up onto the wagon seat. She settled herself with dignity, arranging her thick wool skirts and clutching her ever-present cane. The old mare nickered softly as Dale clucked her into motion, wagon wheels crunching through the thin crust of frost that coated the ground. "Thought you might want to know," Ava said as they rolled along. "I received word that more families arrived at the camp yesterday. The Army's keeping them all confined there now, says it's easier to manage them that way." Her voice held bitter notes. Dale nodded, guiding the wagon around a deep rut. "Then we'll have more hands to help with the plowing." The sun had climbed higher by the time they reached the river camp. Unlike their first visit, faces now turned toward them with recognition and welcome. Children ran alongside the wagon, their quick feet raising puffs of dust, their dark eyes bright with curiosity at the strange equipment. Two men Dale recognized from his previous visit, Walking Bear and his brother, Swift Fox, approached as he climbed down from the wagon. They clasped his hand in greeting, their handshakes firm and warm. "We are ready to learn your ways of growing food," Walking Bear said in careful English. "Our children must eat, even if we cannot hunt as before." Dale unloaded the plows while explaining their purpose. "The earth must be broken and turned before planting," he demonstrated, running his hand along the iron blade, like preparing a bed for sleep. More men gathered around as Dale showed them how to properly yoke the oxen he'd borrowed from a sympathetic neighbor. The great beasts stood patient in their harness, while Dale explained the importance of even pressure and straight lines. "The furrow must run true," he said, positioning himself behind the plow handles, like a well-shot arrow. This comparison brought understanding nods, and soon the men were taking turns guiding the plow across the chosen field. Children trailed behind the workers, mimicking their movements with stick plows of their own making. Their laughter carried across the field, mixing with the jingle of harness and the soft encouragement offered to the oxen. Dale felt his heart lift at the sight. Here was good work being done. Here was hope taking root. While Dale taught the men, Ava had settled herself on a log near where the women gathered. From her basket came fresh bread and dried apple slices, shared freely as the women spoke of their lives. Dale caught glimpses of her between his lessons, her large frame somehow less imposing as she leaned forward to hear a young mother's worried words about her sick baby, or nodded in understanding at an elderly woman's memories of better days. The peaceful scene shattered when hoofbeats announced the lieutenant's return. He rode his horse directly into the newly plowed furrows, spattering dirt onto the fresh-turned earth. The oxen shifted nervously at his approach. "Mrs. Kittredge," the lieutenant's voice cracked with authority. "A word, if you please." Ava did not rise from her log. "Speak your piece, Lieutenant. We're all friends here." The young officer's face reddened. This has gone far enough. Teaching them farming? Providing tools? You're encouraging rebellion, madam. These people need to accept reservation life, not set up permanent camp here. "This is my land, Lieutenant," Ava's voice carried clear across the field. "Deeded to me by the territory itself. I'll use it as I see fit, and if that means teaching honest work to honest folk, then that's what I'll do. The Army takes a dim view of civilians interfering with Indian affairs," the lieutenant warned. Ava's cane struck the ground with a sharp crack. "And I take a dim view of anyone, Army or otherwise, telling me what I can do with my own property. Good day to you, Lieutenant." The officer wheeled his horse around, sending more dirt flying, and galloped away. Dale watched him go, then turned back to his students. "Now then," he said calmly, "about the depth of that furrow." The sun was setting when they finally turned toward home, the wagon lighter without its load of tools but heavy with gifts, beautifully beaded leather pouches from the women, a carved wooden horse from one of the children. The thank yous had been profound in their simplicity, spoken with dignity and hope. That evening, Dale sat in the warm kitchen, working by lamplight to mend a broken harness strap. Without conscious thought, he began to sing softly, an old Amish hymn his mother had loved, its German words flowing smooth as honey. Gott ist die Liebe, lässt mich erlösen. Gott ist die Liebe, liebt auch mich. His voice, though quiet, filled the kitchen with peace. From her chair by the fire, Ava listened, her eyes closed, her usual sharp features softened in the flickering light. "I haven't heard such peace in years," she whispered when he finished. "Not since before the war, when my husband was alive and the world seemed simpler." Dale started another verse, his fingers working the leather as he sang. The hymn spoke of God's love and mercy, of finding light in darkness. Though Ava couldn't understand the words, she seemed to feel their meaning, her breath settling into an easier rhythm. The next morning, Dale woke early as usual. Frost had painted delicate patterns across the window panes, and his breath fogged in the cold air of his room. Standing at the window, looking out across the sleeping land, he felt the weight of the coming season settle on his shoulders. Winter would test them all, test their bodies with its bitter cold, test their resolve with its long nights, test their faith with its scarcity. The families by the river would need more than farming lessons to survive until spring. They would need the strength of community, the warmth of friendship, the sustenance of hope. Dale pressed his hand against the cold glass, watching the frost melt beneath his palm. Through the clearing patch, he could see the sun rising, painting the sky in colors of promise. Whatever challenges winter might bring, they would face them together, the unlikely family they had become. An excommunicated Amish man, a stubborn widow, and a people fighting to hold on to their dignity and their dreams. The morning light grew stronger, melting the frost into tears that ran down the window pane. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called to welcome the day and the work that waited to be done. The January winds howled across Clear Creek, driving snow against the windows of Ava's big house. Inside, warmth and life defied the bitter cold. The kitchen buzzed with quiet activity as 3 women, all widows Ava had taken in, kneaded bread dough while their children played with wooden blocks by the hearth. Dale stamped snow from his boots after checking the barn. The familiar scents of fresh bread and coffee welcomed him. Sarah, the youngest widow at barely 20, stirred a pot of stew while her infant slept bundled in a basket nearby. "Much obliged, Dale," she said softly as he added wood to the stove. "Miss Kittredge says you're riding to the river camp tomorrow." "Weather permitting." Dale nodded, his thoughts on the supplies already loaded in the wagon: dried meat, flour, warm blankets hidden beneath sacks of grain. They'd been making regular deliveries through the winter months, though the snow made travel slower and more dangerous. Martha, an older widow with graying hair, glanced nervously at the window. "Folks in town been talking. Say it ain't right, what you and Miss Kittredge are doing." "Let them talk," Ava's voice rang from the doorway. She stood leaning on her cane, somehow managing to look regal despite her large frame wrapped in a worn shawl. Better their tongues wag than their consciences sleep. The women quickly returned to their work, but Dale noticed their small smiles. Ava had that effect on people. Her sharp tongue and fierce independence inspired a peculiar kind of courage in those around her. That evening, as the household gathered for supper, the long table was full for the first time in years. 8 places were set, steam rising from bowls of rich stew. Dale said grace, his plain words carrying the weight of genuine gratitude. Halfway through the meal, Ava began to cough. Not her usual winter cough, but deep, racking spasms that shook her entire body. Her face turned red as she gasped for breath, her hand clutching the table edge. Dale rose quickly, moving to support her shoulders. "You need to rest," he insisted, his voice firm but gentle. "Martha, would you fetch some water?" "Nonsense," Ava managed between coughs, though she didn't refuse the water when Martha brought it. "I've lived too long to let a little cough frighten me." She attempted a laugh that dissolved into more coughing. "Death will have to work harder than that to claim Ava Kittredge." The children stared wide-eyed until their mothers quietly shooed them from the table. Dale remained at Ava's side until her breathing steadied, his usually stoic face creased with worry. "Don't look at me like that," Ava grumbled, but her voice had lost its usual steel. "I'm fine. Just the winter air, nothing more." Dale knew better, but he held his tongue. They'd both seen how Ava's strength was fading, though neither spoke of it directly. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Dale had just finished hitching the wagon when hoofbeats announced visitors. 3 deputies rode into the yard, their badges glinting dully in the winter sun. Dale recognized them as men who frequently drank at the saloon and rarely enforced the law equally. "We're here for Miss Kittredge," the leader announced, not bothering to dismount. "Need to see the mill ownership papers." Dale stepped forward, positioning himself between the deputies and the house. "Miss Kittredge is indisposed. I can fetch any documents you need to see." The deputy spat in the snow. "Ain't asking you, farm boy. Get the old woman out here." "I can hear you perfectly well from here, Mr. Jenkins," Ava called from the porch. She emerged wrapped in her heavy coat, cane striking the wooden boards with deliberate force. "Though your manners haven't improved since you were a boy stealing apples from my orchard." The deputy's face reddened. "This is official business, Miss Kittredge. There's been questions about your claim to the mill property. Railroad company says their survey shows it might be on their land." "Does it now?" Ava's voice dripped with sarcasm. "How convenient for them." She turned to Dale. "Would you be so kind as to fetch the deed box from my study? Top shelf, behind my father's Bible?" Dale hurried inside, finding the metal box exactly where she'd said. When he returned, Ava was giving the deputies a history lesson about Clear Creek's founding that had them shifting uncomfortably in their saddles. With steady hands, Ava opened the box and produced several official-looking papers. "Here's the original deed to the mill, signed by the territorial governor himself. And here's the survey from 1854 showing the property lines. And here's the receipt for my property taxes, paid in full last month." She held each document up like a weapon. "Would you care to examine them? I'm sure you can read." The deputies glanced at each other, clearly not having expected such thorough documentation. Their leader scowled. "We'll be looking into this further. Railroad has powerful friends. You do well to remember that." "And I have powerful enemies," Ava shot back. "Yet here I stand. Good day, gentlemen." They rode off, their threats hanging in the cold air like smoke. Dale watched until they disappeared around the bend, then turned to find Ava leaning heavily on her cane. "Let's get you inside," he said quietly, offering his arm. She accepted his help without argument, a sign of how truly tired she was. That evening, after the widows and children had gone to bed, Dale and Ava sat in her study. The lamp cast warm light across the desk where those same deeds now lay spread out. Neither had spoken much since the deputy's visit. "They'll be back," Ava finally said, her voice rough with exhaustion. "With more men and fewer pretenses of law." She picked up her cup of tea, but her hand trembled slightly. Dale watched her from his chair by the fire. "We'll face that when it comes." "No, Dale. You'll face it. Time is running short for me." She met his eyes directly. "Don't try to deny it. We both know the truth of it." Dale's chest tightened. He'd been trying not to think about what would happen when, if, "You'll need to be ready to stand alone," Ava continued. "The railroad wants this land. The army wants the Arapaho gone. Only the deeds and your courage will stand between them and what's right." "I'm just one man," Dale said softly. "A stranger here, an outcast from my own people." "You're more than that now." Ava's voice grew fierce despite its weakness. "You're my chosen heir, the guardian of my promise. When I'm gone, this house, this land, everything I've built, it all becomes your responsibility to protect until it can be properly transferred to the Arapaho people." Dale felt the weight of her words settle onto his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He thought of the deputy's threats, of the railroad's power, of the army's authority. The task seemed impossible. Yet, as he looked at Ava, this proud, stubborn woman who had taken him in and shown him a different kind of courage, he knew he could not refuse. "I promise," he said simply, the words carrying all the strength of his Amish upbringing. A promise made before God and neighbor was a sacred thing. Ava nodded, seemingly satisfied. She turned to gaze out the window at the snowy night. the lamp's flame reflected in the glass, making it impossible to tell if the wetness in her eyes was from the light or something else. Dale sat with her in companionable silence, listening to the wind and the crackling fire, feeling the magnitude of the path ahead. Though his heart trembled at the thought of standing alone against such powerful forces, he knew with certainty that this was where God had led him. The lamp burned low, casting long shadows across the study's walls. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Clear Creek in a blanket of white that held no hint of the struggles to come. Heavy snow began falling on Clear Creek, thick flakes swirling down from iron-gray skies. By nightfall, drifts had sealed the doors and windows of Ava's house, forcing Dale to dig paths just to reach the barn for evening chores. The storm raged for 3 days, trapping them indoors with only occasional breaks to tend the animals. On the second afternoon, as Dale stoked the fire in Ava's study, she sat wrapped in quilts near the warmth, watching the flames dance. Her cough had worsened with the weather, but her eyes remained bright and alert. "Pull up that chair," she said, gesturing to Dale. "No sense in both of us being lonely while we're stuck here." Dale settled into the worn leather armchair, his hands still cold from carrying in firewood. The room felt different in the storm's dim light, more intimate somehow. "I was younger than you when I first married," Ava began suddenly, her voice distant with memory. "Thomas Kittredge owned the general store back then. He was kind, steady, reminded me of you in some ways." Dale listened quietly as she spoke of her early days in Clear Creek, when the town was little more than a cluster of cabins. She described Thomas's death from fever, leaving her alone to run the store at 23. Her voice grew harder as she recalled the men who tried to cheat her out of the business, thinking a woman would be easy prey. "But I learned," she said, touching her cane. "Learned to read contracts better than any lawyer, learned to negotiate harder than any man. When the mill came up for sale, I mortgaged everything to buy it." She smiled grimly. "The bank president nearly had an apoplexy, seeing a woman sign those papers." Dale brought her tea, steeped with herbs from his mother's recipes, horehound for the cough, chamomile to soothe. Ava accepted it with a nod of thanks. "The mill nearly broke me that first year," she continued. "Drought, broken equipment, workers quitting because they wouldn't take orders from a woman." Her fingers tightened on the cup. "But I survived. Built it into something that mattered. Gave fair prices to farmers, hired men others wouldn't, even traded with the Arapaho before the army forced them out." As the storm howled outside, Ava shared more stories, victories and defeats, moments of courage and compromise. Dale began to understand the weight of the legacy she was entrusting to him. This wasn't just about land or money. It was about justice long delayed. On the fourth morning, Dale woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving a pristine white landscape under crystal-clear skies. After checking on Ava, who was sleeping soundly, he hitched the wagon and headed into town for badly needed supplies. The streets were already churned to muddy slush by wagon wheels and horse hooves. Dale tied up outside the general store and began loading sacks of flour and coffee. As he worked, loud voices drifted from the saloon across the street. The door was propped open despite the cold, and words carried clearly in the winter air. "That old witch needs to learn her place," a man slurred. "Railroad's offering good money for that mill." "Shame if something happened to her barn," another voice added. "Might convince her to sell, eh?" Coarse laughter followed. Dale's hands stilled on the wagon. He recognized the voices, the same deputies who had demanded to see the deeds. "Tonight," the first voice continued, "after the moon sets, just a little fire to warn her. Nobody gets hurt, but she'll know we mean business." Dale finished loading quickly, his heart pounding. He urged the horses faster on the return trip, praying he wasn't too late. When he arrived, Ava was in her chair by the kitchen stove, looking better after her rest. "Ava," Dale said urgently, "I heard something in town. Men planning to burn the barn tonight. Deputies, drinking in the saloon." Ava's face hardened, but she showed no surprise. "Cowards," she spat. "Too afraid to face me in daylight." "We should alert the sheriff," Dale suggested. "Sheriff's probably in on it." Ava's voice was bitter. "No, we face this ourselves." She met his worried gaze. "I won't be driven from what's right by fear, Dale." "Will you?" Dale thought of his Amish teachings about non-violence, then of the hungry children at the Arapaho camp. "No," he said firmly, "I won't." They spent the afternoon preparing, moving hay away from the walls, filling water barrels, checking lanterns. As darkness fell, Dale positioned himself in the barn, pretending to sharpen tools while watching through gaps in the planks. Ava had refused to stay in the house, sitting instead on the porch despite the cold. The moon set early, leaving only starlight on snow. Dale heard them before he saw them, drunken whispers and stumbling feet. Then firelight bloomed as torches were lit. The first one arced through the air, landing on the roof with a soft thump. More followed, flames catching quickly in the dry wood. Dale burst out of the barn door. "Fire!" he shouted. "Fire!" He glimpsed men running away as smoke began pouring from the roof. Coughing, he rushed back inside to free the horses and cattle. The animals bolted past him into the night, wild-eyed with panic. Heat pressed against his face as he searched for any creatures left behind. A scream cut through the roar of flames. "Dale!" He emerged to find Ava collapsed on the porch steps, clutching her chest. The smoke had triggered not just her cough, but something worse. Her face was gray, her breathing shallow and pained. Lanterns appeared in the distance as neighbors finally noticed the fire. Dale ignored them, gathering Ava into his arms. She felt frighteningly light as he carried her inside, away from the smoke. "The barn," she gasped. "The animals." "Animals are safe," Dale assured her, laying her gently on her bed. "Rest now, please." Her hand clutched his sleeve with surprising strength. "Promise me," she wheezed. "Promise you won't give up." "I promise," Dale said firmly, though his heart trembled at how cold her fingers felt. "I promise, before God and all his angels." Neighbors crowded the yard now, forming a bucket line too late to save the barn. Dale barely noticed them, his attention fixed on Ava's labored breathing and the terrible knowledge that everything had changed with this night's fire. Dawn crept pale and hesitant through the frost-covered windows. Dale had barely slept, spending the night in a chair beside Ava's bed, listening to her labored breathing. The fire in her bedroom hearth had burned low, casting weak shadows on the walls. Dr. Matthews arrived just after sunrise, his leather bag crusted with snow from his early morning ride. Dale stood back as the physician examined Ava, noting how small she looked against the white pillows. Her usual commanding presence had diminished, leaving her frail and gray-faced. "Her heart is very weak," Dr. Matthews said quietly, packing away his stethoscope. He gestured for Dale to follow him into the hallway. The smoke and excitement were too much. "Another attack like that could—" He paused, adjusting his spectacles. "Well, she may not survive it." Dale gripped the doorframe, steadying himself. "Is there nothing to be done?" "Complete rest. No excitement. No business matters." The doctor shook his head. "Though knowing Mrs. Kittredge, she's not likely to follow that advice." After the doctor left, Dale tended the animals they'd recovered from the night before, housing them temporarily in the tool shed. The morning was bitterly cold, his breath forming clouds as he worked. The barn's blackened skeleton stood stark against the snow, wisps of smoke still rising from the ruins. Movement at the property line caught his eye. 3 figures approached on horseback, wrapped in blankets against the cold. As they drew closer, Dale recognized them as Arapaho men from the river camp. They dismounted carefully, showing empty hands in greeting. "We saw the fire," the eldest said in careful English. "Some say railroad men did this." His dark eyes studied Dale's face. "They will blame us, yes?" "Say we burned your barn." Dale's throat tightened at their fear. These proud people reduced to worrying about false accusations, their lives hanging by such fragile threads. "No," he said firmly. "I saw who did it. I will testify to that." The men exchanged glances. "Perhaps we should move camp," another suggested. "Go further from town before trouble comes." "No," Dale said again, more strongly this time. "This is your land, or it will be. Mrs. Kittredge and I will protect you." The words came out before he could question them, surprising him with their certainty. The eldest man touched his chest in acknowledgement. "How is the widow?" "We heard she was hurt." "She is," Dale swallowed hard. "She is very ill, but her will remains strong." They nodded solemnly. The youngest reached into his blanket and brought out a small leather pouch. "Medicine," he explained, "from our healer. For her breathing." Dale accepted the gift with both hands, touched by their concern for Ava. After the men departed, he stood watching their horses pick their way back through the snow, his promise echoing in his mind. How could he protect anyone when he had always been taught to avoid conflict? Throughout the day, Dale moved between his chores and Ava's bedside. She drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes muttering about deeds and contracts. Late in the afternoon, her eyes opened clear and alert. "Dale?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here." He sat beside her, taking her cold hand in his. "The Arapaho. Did they come?" "Yes. They brought medicine for you." A faint smile touched her lips. "Good people. Better than most who call themselves Christian." She squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "Dale, listen carefully. In my desk, there's a letter to my lawyer in Denver if anything happens to me." "Don't talk that way," Dale interrupted. "You need rest." "No." The word came out sharp, followed by painful coughing. When she caught her breath, her eyes blazed. "You must hear this. The letter confirms everything. The transfer of lands, your position as executor, the terms of the trust. It's all legal, all properly witnessed." She clutched his hand tighter. "Promise me you'll finish what I began. Promise me you won't let them steal this chance for justice." Dale felt tears burning in his eyes. "I promise. But Ava, I'm afraid. I don't know how to fight these men." "You're stronger than you know," she whispered. "God doesn't call us to be fearless. He calls us to be faithful." The words struck Dale to his core. Memories flooded back, his father teaching him the Amish ways of peace, the bishop warning him about the dangers of the outside world. But perhaps there was another kind of peace, one that came through standing firm for what was right. "Dear Lord," he began praying aloud, his voice rough with emotion, "grant me courage to do what must be done. Show me the way through this valley." Tears fell freely now, the first he'd allowed himself since leaving his community. "Help me protect these people, this land, this promise." Ava's hand tightened on his as he prayed, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. Outside, wind whistled through the broken barn boards, driving snow against the house's shutters. The sound reminded Dale of how precarious their position was. A sick woman, a peaceful man, standing against the crushing power of the railroad and town prejudice. Yet as he sat there, holding Ava's hand, watching the snow dance in the gathering dusk, something settled in his heart. The thought of violence still chilled him, but the thought of failing these people who trusted him, that was colder still. He would find a way to face the town, to protect what Ava had built, to fulfill this sacred trust. Not with fists or guns, but with the same quiet strength that had helped him survive his own exile. "Rest now," he told Ava softly, tucking the quilt around her shoulders. "I'll be nearby." She nodded, her eyes already closing. Dale remained in his chair as darkness filled the room, watching over her sleep while outside the ruined barn smoldered beneath the falling snow, a stark reminder of all they had to lose and all they had to protect. 2 days after the barn burning, Dale hitched the wagon before dawn, his breath visible in the cold morning air. He checked on Ava, finding her asleep but breathing steadier, before setting out alone toward the river camp. The wagon wheels crunched through fresh snow as the sun climbed higher, painting the white landscape in shades of rose and gold. His thoughts churned as he drove. The weight of Ava's trust pressed heavy on his shoulders, along with the faces of those who depended on them both. The burned barn stood as a stark warning of what the townspeople might do next. Yet something had changed in Dale since that night of fire and prayer. Though fear still gnawed at his belly, purpose straightened his spine. As he approached the army checkpoint, the young lieutenant barely glanced at him before waving him through. Dale had become a familiar sight over the past weeks, though the soldiers' indifference worried him. Would they act if more trouble came? The Arapaho camp spread before him, looking more sparse than usual. Several teepees had been taken down, their absence leaving dark circles in the snow. His heart sank as he realized what this meant. Women paused in their morning work to watch him pass, their faces guarded. Children who usually ran to greet him hung back by their mothers' skirts. Elder Natho emerged from his teepee as Dale brought the wagon to a stop. The old man's face was grave as he approached, followed by other tribal leaders. They gathered in a loose circle, waiting for Dale to speak first. "I see you are preparing to leave," Dale said quietly, fighting to keep his voice steady. Natho nodded. "The fire at your barn was a message. We have seen such messages before." He gestured to the missing teepees. "Some families have already gone north, seeking safer ground." Dale's hands trembled as he gripped his hat. "Please," he said, the word catching in his throat. "Please wait. This land, Mrs. Kittredge's land, it is meant for you, all of it. The deeds are being prepared." The elders exchanged glances. One spoke up, his voice heavy with doubt. "Papers did not protect our hunting grounds. Treaties did not keep soldiers from our villages." "I know." Dale took a deep breath. "I know you have been betrayed before, but Mrs. Kittredge is different. I am different." He looked each elder in the eye. "Let me prove it. Today." He walked to the wagon and began unloading tools, hoes, spades, and precious bags of winter wheat seed. "There is a protected hollow beyond those trees," he pointed. "The soil there is good. If we plant now, before the ground freezes hard, the wheat will sleep under the snow. Come spring, you will have your own grain." The elders studied him silently. Dale's heart pounded. Then Natho stepped forward, running his fingers through the wheat seeds. "You would plant now? When snow flies and the earth grows hard?" "Yes." Dale squared his shoulders. "To show faith that spring will come. To show trust that you will still be here to harvest." A long moment passed. Then Natho smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Then teach us, friend. Show us how to make the earth yield bread." For the next several hours, Dale worked alongside the Arapaho men, showing them how to break the soil and plant in straight rows. Women brought hot tea in tin cups, as children watched wide-eyed, asking endless questions about how seeds grew under snow. Dale answered patiently, remembering his own father teaching him these same lessons back in Pennsylvania. The sun was low when Dale finally packed the wagon for home. Natho walked with him to the horses. "You have given us more than seed today," the elder said softly. "You have given hope. We will stay, at least until spring shows its face." Dale nodded, emotion making it hard to speak. He gripped the older man's hand before climbing onto the wagon seat. As he drove away, he heard children's voices singing what sounded like a planting song, the foreign words carrying clear across the snow. The house was dark when he returned, save for a lamp burning in Ava's bedroom window. He found her propped up against her pillows, looking pale but alert. Her sharp eyes studied his face as he pulled a chair close to her bed. "You went to the camp today," she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, some families had already left, but he told her about the wheat planting, the children's questions, Natho's promise to stay until spring. Ava listened intently, her hands folded in her lap. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know," she said finally, "when I first brought you here, I thought I was getting a servant. Someone to fetch and carry while I finished my work." She reached for his hand. "Instead, I got a steward. A true partner in this calling." Dale felt his throat tighten. "I'm trying to be worthy of your trust." "You already are." Her grip was weak but warm. "Now, would you read to me? The lamp's too dim for my old eyes, but I'd love to hear the scripture." Dale retrieved the Bible from the parlor, its leather cover smooth and familiar in his hands. He settled back in the chair and opened to the Psalms, his voice growing stronger as he read. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." The ancient words filled the room with peace. When he glanced up, he saw Ava had drifted to sleep, a faint smile on her face. He continued reading softly until the lamp burned low, then tucked the quilt around her shoulders and slipped quietly out. The night was crystal clear, stars blazing in the black sky. Dale stood on the porch, letting the cold air fill his lungs. The burned barn was a darker shadow against the starlit snow, yet somehow its presence no longer filled him with dread. Instead, he felt a deep sense of rightness, of being exactly where God meant him to be. He thought of the wheat sleeping beneath the snow, of Natho's weathered hands in the soil, of Ava's trust in him. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he was no longer walking it alone. Above him, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, and Dale felt God's presence as close as his own breath. The summons arrived on a bitter morning, frost etching spidery patterns across the window panes. Dale found the official notice tacked to their front door, the paper crackling as he pulled it free. His stomach knotted as he read the formal text demanding their appearance before the town council. Inside, Ava sat at her usual place at the breakfast table, her face pale but determined. "What does it say?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Dale cleared his throat. "By order of the Clear Creek Town Council, Mrs. Ava Kittredge and Mr. Dale Stoltzfus are hereby summoned to appear this afternoon at 2 o'clock to address charges of aiding and abetting enemies of progress." His voice trailed off. Ava's mouth tightened. "Enemies of progress," she repeated, her tone sharp with scorn. "That's what they call helping starving children now." She pushed herself up from the table, leaning heavily on her cane. "Well, they shall have their meeting. Help me find my good shawl." "You can't mean to go in person," Dale protested. "Your health is exactly why I must go now, while I still can." Her eyes met his, bright with purpose. "This is the moment, Dale. Today we show them that what's done cannot be undone." Dale wanted to argue further, but he recognized the steel in her voice. Instead, he helped her prepare, bringing her warmest clothes and stoking the fire in the parlor while she rested. By 1:30, he had hitched the wagon and padded the seat with extra quilts. The short journey into town seemed to take hours. Dale drove carefully, mindful of every bump that made Ava wince. Main Street was unusually crowded for a weekday afternoon, with clusters of people gathering outside the town hall. Their wagon's approach drew stares and whispers. "Steady now," Ava murmured, as Dale helped her down from the wagon. She gripped his arm tightly as they made their way up the wooden steps, her cane tapping a determined rhythm. Inside, the meeting hall was packed, every bench filled with townspeople. The council members sat elevated at their long table, looking down at the assembled crowd with stern faces. Mayor Harrison cleared his throat as Dale and Ava made their way to the front. "Mrs. Kittredge, Mr. Stoltzfus, You have been summoned to address serious concerns about your recent activities." "Activities?" Ava's voice carried clearly through the hall. "You mean feeding hungry families? Teaching farming to those who need land to survive?" "We mean consorting with Indians who should be on their reservation," Councilman Peters cut in, "encouraging them to remain where they don't belong." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Dale felt Ava's grip tighten on his arm as she drew herself up straighter. "I have something to say about belonging," she announced. From her pocket, she withdrew a thick envelope. "These papers were filed with the territorial court last week. They legally transfer ownership of all my lands, including the mill, to the Arapaho families currently camped by the river." The room erupted in shock. Deputies stepped forward, hands moving toward the envelope, but Dale shifted smoothly between them and Ava. His voice, when he spoke, carried the quiet authority he'd learned in countless Amish services. "The land must not be sold permanently," he quoted, "for the land is mine, and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers." The familiar words of Leviticus filled the sudden silence. "Throughout the land that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land." Mayor Harrison's face reddened. "This is not a church service, Mr. Stoltzfus quote." "No," Dale agreed, his voice steady. "This is about stewardship. About doing what's right with what God has given us." He looked around the room, meeting hostile stares with calm certainty. "Defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed." "The law," Councilman Peters began. "The law," Ava interrupted, "is satisfied. The deeds are legal and properly witnessed. Dale will serve as trustee until the Arapaho Council can establish their own governance of the land." Her voice shook slightly, but her chin remained high. "It's done, gentlemen. The only question now is whether Clear Creek will be remembered for fighting progress or embracing it." A heavy silence fell. Dale could feel the weight of every eye in the room, could sense the struggle between ingrained prejudice and awakening conscience. Then, from the back of the hall, old Reverend Smith stood up. "The scripture, Mr. Stoltzfus quoted," he said slowly, "speaks truth. We who call ourselves Christians might do well to examine our hearts." He looked pointedly at the council members. "Perhaps we should be asking how to help our new neighbors succeed, rather than trying to drive them away." Before anyone could respond, Ava swayed suddenly against Dale's arm. He felt her trembling and recognized the gray tinge to her face that preceded her heart spells. Without hesitation, he swept her up in his arms, her body feeling fragile as a bird's. "This meeting is finished," he announced firmly, already turning toward the door. The crowd parted before them, whether from respect or shock he couldn't tell. He heard the mayor calling for order behind them, but he focused only on getting Ava safely to the wagon. She roused slightly as he settled her on the padded seat. "Did you see their faces?" she whispered. "When you quoted scripture, they couldn't argue with the word itself." "Rest now," Dale told her, tucking quilts around her. "You've done what you came to do." As he climbed up beside her and took the reins, Dale's face was set with new purpose. Let them whisper, let them scheme. The deeds were filed, the land secured. Whatever came next, he would face it with the same quiet strength he'd found in that meeting hall. The wagon rolled homeward through the winter afternoon, leaving behind a town council chamber still buzzing with shocked conversations and a community forced to confront its conscience. Beside him, Ava dozed against his shoulder, her breathing labored but peaceful. Above them, the Colorado sky stretched vast and blue, indifferent to the small dramas of humans below, yet somehow bearing witness to this day of courage and change. The wagon wheels crunched softly on frozen ground as Dale guided them home from the town meeting. Ava dozed fitfully against his shoulder, her breathing shallow and uneven. The confrontation had drained what little strength she had left, and Dale's heart ached watching her struggle for each breath. Inside the house, he built up the fire until warmth filled every corner. Ava allowed him to help her into her favorite armchair, her hands trembling as she gripped his arm. "Thank you, Dale," she whispered, "for everything today. You stood as tall as any man I've known." But that evening, fever set in. Dale stayed up through the night, placing cool cloths on her forehead and helping her sip water. By morning, her skin burned hot as the stovetop, and her words began to wander. "Thomas," she called out, reaching for someone Dale couldn't see. "Thomas, is that you?" Her late husband's name came again and again as the fever took hold. Dale sent the farmhand's boy racing for the doctor, but when old Doc Matthews arrived, his grave expression said everything. "The heart attack from the barn fire weakened her considerably," he said quietly. "This fever may be more than she can fight." The next days blurred together as Dale kept his vigil. He spooned thin broth between her cracked lips, changed sweat-soaked sheets, and prayed constantly. Sometimes Ava would wake clear-eyed, and those moments became precious gifts. "I was too proud when I was young," she told him one afternoon, her voice barely a whisper. "Thought I could buy respect with money and land. Thomas tried to tell me different, but I wouldn't listen. Not till he was gone." Dale held her thin hand. "You learned better ways to use what God gave you." "Perhaps." Her eyes drifted to the window, where snow was beginning to fall. "I've made so many mistakes, Dale. Hurt people with my sharp tongue. Turned away those who needed help, back when I only cared about profit." A tear slid down her weathered cheek. "But the Arapaho, helping them feels like making something right at last." "Rest now," Dale soothed, adjusting her quilts. "God's mercy is new every morning." Through the long nights, he sang hymns he remembered from his Amish childhood. "Amazing Grace," "Be Thou My Vision," the old German songs his mother had hummed while kneading bread. Sometimes Ava would squeeze his hand in time with the melody, though her eyes remained closed. The women from the Arapaho camp came to help, bringing herbs and soft-voiced prayers in their own tongue. They moved quietly through the house, their presence a comfort. One elderly grandmother sat with Dale through an entire night, teaching him their words for faith and courage. On the 7th evening after the town meeting, the lamp burned low as Dale sat beside Ava's bed. She had been sleeping deeply all day, barely stirring. But as darkness gathered, her eyes suddenly opened, clear and present. "Dale," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Come closer, son." He leaned in, taking her outstretched hand. Her fingers were cool now, no longer burning with fever. "Listen carefully," she whispered. "The deeds are in my desk, top drawer. Everything's legal and proper. But papers alone won't be enough." Her grip tightened. "They'll try to break our covenant, Dale. The railroad men, the land speculators, they'll come with money first, then threats. I won't let them take it," Dale promised. "The land belongs to the Arapaho now." Ava's eyes searched his face. "You'll need more than just courage. You'll need wisdom, patience." A small smile touched her lips. "That quiet strength of yours, that's what they'll need most. Protect them, son. That is our covenant." "I will," Dale whispered, his throat tight with tears. "I swear it." She nodded once, satisfied. Then her eyes drifted toward the window, where the first stars were appearing in the winter sky. "Thomas," she murmured, "I see you waiting." Her hand went slack in Dale's grip. One final breath whispered past her lips, and then stillness filled the room. Dale bowed his head, tears falling freely now as he recited the Lord's Prayer in a shaking voice. The next morning dawned crystal clear and bitterly cold. Dale had spent the night in his chair beside her bed, unable to leave her. Now he forced himself to rise, to face the tasks that couldn't wait. He hitched the wagon and drove into town, where he arranged for a proper casket at the carpenter's shop. The news of Ava's passing spread quickly. Though few had understood or supported her choices, respect for death brought several townswomen to help prepare her body. Laying her out in her best dress, Dale chose a spot on the hill behind the house for her grave, where she could look out over the fields and river valley forever. The ground was frozen solid, but men from both town and the Arapaho camp came to help dig through the hard earth. They worked in silence, breath steaming in the cold air. When all was ready, Reverend Smith came to speak the burial service. Townfolk and Arapaho stood together as the old minister's words drifted on the winter wind. Dale noticed that even some of the council members had come, standing at the back of the crowd with heads bowed. After the others left, Dale remained by the fresh, turned earth. He took out the wooden cross he'd carved the night before, carefully smoothing his fingers over the letters of her name. The wood was plain but solid, like the woman it would remember. With reverent care, he set the cross at the head of her grave. Then, standing in the gathering dusk, he began to sing. The words of an old Amish hymn floated across the snowy hillside, a song of peace and homecoming. Tears froze on his cheeks as he sang all 4 verses, his voice growing stronger with each line. When the last note faded, Dale turned toward the house. It looked vast and empty now, its windows dark against the twilight sky. But as he walked down the hill, he felt the warmth of Ava's final words wrap around him like a quilt. "Protect them, son. That is our covenant." Inside, he lit the lamps one by one, pushing back the shadows. The familiar scent of Ava's medicine still hung in the air, and her cane leaned in its usual spot by the door. But under the grief, Dale felt something else taking root, a sense of purpose, of promise. He was no longer just a hired hand or reluctant husband. He was a steward, entrusted with a sacred task. He settled into Ava's chair by the fire, feeling the weight of all that lay ahead. But the empty house didn't feel quite so hollow anymore, filled as it was with the echo of her fierce spirit and the warmth of her final blessing. The days after Ava's burial stretched long and empty. Dale rose each morning before dawn, moving through his chores like a man walking underwater. The house seemed to hold its breath, rooms too quiet without the tap of Ava's cane or her sharp, caring voice calling out instructions. He fed the chickens mechanically, scattered corn for them as the pale winter sun crept over the hills. The barn's charred skeleton stood as a dark reminder of all that had changed. Even the kitchen felt wrong. Too spacious with just one plate at the table, one cup of coffee cooling untouched while he stared at Ava's empty chair. On the 4th morning, as frost painted delicate patterns on the windows, Dale heard wagon wheels crunching through the snow. He stepped onto the porch, squinting against the glare to see several horse-drawn sleds approaching from the direction of the river camp. Elder Natho sat tall in the first sled, his face grave beneath his hat. Behind him, other elders and their families followed, bundled against the cold. Dale's heart clenched, fearing bad news. Had the railroad men made good on their threats? But as the sleds drew closer, he saw they carried parcels wrapped in trade blankets. Women climbed down carefully, bearing covered baskets that steamed in the crisp air. Children hopped from the back, their eyes bright with excitement despite the solemn occasion. "We come to remember Grandmother Kittredge," Elder Natho said simply, extending his hand to Dale, "to share food and stories, as is proper when a great soul passes." Dale's throat tightened. "Much obliged," he managed, stepping back to welcome them inside. The women moved straight to the kitchen, unpacking their gifts with quiet efficiency. Soon the table groaned under platters of smoked venison, dried berries, and fresh bannock bread. One grandmother presented Dale with a beautifully beaded medicine pouch. "For strength," she explained in halting English, pressing it into his hands. "Made with prayers." The children darted outside, their laughter floating through the windows as they chased the startled chickens. The sound pierced Dale's grief like a shaft of sunlight. He remembered how Ava would watch the town children playing in her yard, her stern face softening with joy. Elder Natho settled into Ava's chair by the fire, accepting the coffee Dale offered. She was a woman of great heart, he said, gazing into the flames. When others saw only savages, she saw people. When they spoke of progress, she spoke of justice. Other elders nodded, sharing memories of Ava's first visits to their camp, her determination to learn their names and customs. They spoke of her quiet generosity during hard winters, how she never demanded thanks or made them feel less for needing help. Dale listened, learning new facets of the woman he'd known so briefly yet so deeply. The house seemed to warm with each story, as if Ava's spirit drew closer to hear the voices of those she'd championed. Around noon, an unexpected knock at the door made everyone tense. Dale opened it to find Sarah Miller, the butcher's wife, standing awkwardly with a covered dish. I brought a pie, she said, not quite meeting his eyes, and wanted to say, well, Ms. Kittredge helped us once. When Tom was laid up with his back and we couldn't make rent, she brought food at night so nobody'd see, said her garden had produced too much. Sarah's voice wavered. We never forgot that kindness. Dale welcomed her in, watching as the town woman and the Arapaho guests regarded each other cautiously at first, then began sharing plates and conversation. More neighbors trickled in throughout the afternoon. Jacob Turner, the carpenter, offered to help rebuild the barn come spring. The cooper's widow brought fresh-baked bread and quiet tears. Seems Ms. Kittredge had a way of helping folks without announcing it, old Pete Watson observed, accepting a cup of coffee. Reckon there's more stories like that than any of us knew. As the short winter day faded toward dusk, Dale stood in the doorway, watching the unlikely gathering. Children of both peoples played together in the yard, inventing some complicated game with sticks and snow. Women exchanged recipes and sewing techniques, while men discussed weather patterns and planting strategies. The barriers between them hadn't vanished, but they'd grown softer, more permeable. Later, after the last visitors departed and darkness settled over the silent house, Dale lit the lamp in Ava's study. The familiar scent of leather bindings and ink welcomed him as he crossed to her desk. Her Bible lay where she'd left it, a piece of yarn marking her place in Psalms. He sank into her chair, running his fingers over the worn cover. The medicine pouch from the Arapaho grandmother hung warm against his chest. Outside, an owl called softly, and far away a coyote answered. Dale opened the Bible carefully, letting it fall open to where Ava had marked it. The words seemed to glow in the lamplight. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. His voice grew stronger as he read aloud, filling the room with ancient promises of comfort and guidance. When he finished the psalm, he bowed his head in prayer, no longer feeling quite so alone. Thank you, Lord, he whispered, for showing me how to carry on her work, for bringing life back to this house through unexpected hands. Help me be worthy of this trust. The lamp flickered gently, casting his shadow on the wall. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady, covering the tracks of all who'd come to share their stories. Dale felt peace settle over him like a familiar quilt. Ava's dream of bringing people together was already bearing fruit, even in the depths of winter. He rose slowly, setting the Bible back in its place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he could rest, knowing that seeds of change were taking root in the fertile soil of shared grief and remembered kindness. The April sun warmed Dale's back as he knelt in the freshly thawed earth. Around him, Arapaho children watched intently as he demonstrated how to space the corn seeds just right. Their small hands mimicked his movements, carefully dropping kernels into the straight furrows they'd carved together. Like this? Little Sarah Two Hearts asked, her dark eyes serious as she measured the distance between seeds with her palm. That's just right, Dale nodded, smiling at her concentration. The corn needs room to grow tall and strong. More children scattered down the rows, some singing softly in their native tongue, while others counted seeds in English. Dale moved among them, adjusting eager hands that wanted to plant too deep or too shallow. The morning air carried the sweet scent of warming soil and new grass. From the road, several townspeople had stopped their wagons to watch. Dale felt their eyes, but kept his focus on the children. Unlike the hostile stares of winter, these gazes held more curiosity than judgment. The rebuilt barn stood proudly behind them, its fresh timber gleaming in the spring light. Neighbors had helped raise it just weeks ago, working alongside Arapaho men as if they'd done so all their lives. As the sun began its slow descent, Dale gathered the empty seed bags and thanked his young helpers. They scampered off toward the cluster of new lodges that dotted the western field, where cooking fires already sent up thin columns of smoke. Their laughter echoed across the land that was now truly their home. Dale walked alone to the hill behind the house, where Ava's grave lay beneath an old oak tree. Fresh grass had begun to sprout around the wooden cross he'd carved. He placed a small bouquet of prairie wildflowers, purple coneflowers and yellow black-eyed Susans, at its base. "You'd be proud today, Ava," he whispered, touching the rough wood. "Your land feeds the hungry just like you wanted. Those children you fought for, they're planting corn and learning to read right here in your fields." His voice grew thick. "Your shocking plan worked. Nobody thought it would, but you knew better." The evening breeze stirred the flowers, carrying the sounds of life from below. Children's voices, women calling them to supper, men talking as they finished the day's work. The community Ava had dreamed of was taking root, growing as surely as the seeds they'd planted. Dale turned back toward the house, his steps lighter than they'd been in months. In the parlor, he lit the lamp that had become his evening ritual. Its warm glow spilled through the windows and across the fields, a beacon of welcome in the gathering dusk. Through the open windows came the sounds of his new family, Arapaho voices mixing with English, children's laughter, the simple music of people living in peace. Dale smiled faintly, remembering how empty and lost he'd felt that first night, as a stranger in Ava's house. Now he knew exactly where he belonged. Here, shepherding this unlikely gathering of souls, keeping faith with the remarkable woman who had seen it all so clearly. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.